What's up, everybody? It's me, the Magic Man. And contrary to popular belief, I do occasionally make videos, though I'd understand if you thought otherwise. But recently, I've had a bit of inspiration to do a different kind of video. A sort of discussion video, a review, perhaps. I've actually always wanted to do a series of review videos, but I never got around to it since I couldn't think up a catchy tagline for them. Now, if you know me, you'll know I have a fondness for a very particular genre of games, shoot-em-ups. I really enjoy the sort of game that has you trying to weave around dozens of projectiles while trying to shoot down as many enemies as possible. Shmups used to be everywhere a couple of decades ago, but they've fallen into a niche status these days. I think that's a shame because there are a lot of really cool shooters worth looking into. For example, I've gotten into a series of games called The Tale of Altenex. Developed by Japanese Dojin Soft studio Cider Skane, The Tale of Altenex is comprised of 3 games, Kamui, Reflex, and Altenex Second, all of which are very different shooters despite belonging to the same series, each having their own quirks and core mechanics. I'd like to go over all of them, but for this video I'll just be talking about the first of the 3, Kamui. I think now is also a good time to mention that I'm going to go pretty in-depth while talking about these games, so buckle up because this might take like 5 or 10 or 40 minutes. Kamui, originally released in 1999, is possibly Cider Skane's most well-known title, heralded by some as one of the greatest PC shmups ever to be released. Kamui features 6 stages and, according to the Steam page, the real deal 2D arcade shooting action. Whatever that means. I guess every other shmup is fake. Sorry, Toho. Whenever you start up Kamui, a cutscene plays that introduces us to the game's setting. It's short and vague, but the gist of it is that there's a giant man-made space station hovering around in Earth's orbit, but it's from an era before humanity was almost blown to smithereens and sent back to a primitive state. So hundreds of years later, the humans that managed to rebuild society essentially worship it as a god, but something inside the space station is awoken so it can go end humanity for good. Then you're brought to the main menu. Before we continue, I'd like to mention that Kamui takes more time to explain its plot than it does to explain how to play the game. That is to say, it doesn't. There is no tutorial, no instructions, no anything. What I'm getting at here is that figuring out how to play this game requires a bit of fumbling around. It doesn't help that the buttons you use to control the game are labeled as 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the options menu, but do not mean the 1 through 4 keys on your keyboard. They actually refer to the Z, X, C, and escape keys for some reason. And no, you can't rebind them. You can only swap between various presets. Kamui does have native controller support though, which is a plus. Still, you're not told exactly how everything functions, so the only way to fully figure out how this game plays is to learn from an informed outside source. Luckily for you, I'm both informed and an outside source, so I'll break it down. When playing Kamui, you should take note that the game takes place on 2 different planes, the foreground and the background. Your ship maneuvers in the foreground, and you have a basic gun you use to shoot enemies that are also in the foreground. It's pretty weak and narrow at first, but occasionally enemies drop weapon power-ups that increase the gun's damage and spread up to 7 times. You also have a homing lightning attack that automatically targets onto enemies flying in the background. If you hold down the shoot and homing buttons at the same time, you'll fire what's called the lightning katana. It's a large, forward-firing laser beam that does tons of damage to enemies in the foreground and destroys almost all projectiles it comes into contact with. Both the lightning katana and the homing lightning work off an energy meter that passively charges up at all times. The homing attack will deplete the energy bar with every use, and the lightning katana temporarily decreases the maximum energy as you use it. Between these 3 different weapons, Kamui's gameplay revolves around knowing when to use each, in particular, the homing lightning and the lightning katana. Careful attention to both the background and the foreground while also practicing good management of the energy bar allows you to deal with many threats shortly after or even before they get to shoot at you. This includes bosses, who will often shift between the background and the foreground multiple times over the course of their attack patterns. Not to mention, they'll have many destructible parts on them, some of which can only be destroyed with the homing lightning. All in all, I think it makes for some pretty intense gameplay. Intense as it may be, however, Kamui is also really, really forgiving. Like, maybe more so than I've ever seen in a shooter. The actual gameplay is really challenging between managing your attacks and dodging enemy fire, but Kamui gives you 2 lives and 5 health, meaning you can be hit 14 times before you game over, which is pretty durable compared to the myriad of shmups that just blow you up if you so much as look at a projectile. On top of that, health pickups appear about once a stage, so you've got a lot of HP, big whoop, right? How about the fact that when you game over, you can continue infinitely? That's right, at no point in time, no matter how badly you're doing, does the game ever say you have to stop. Even in games where you can save between stages or use a stage select, you usually still have to redo the stage if you die. But not in Kamui. You can just keep continuing until you beat the game. I'm all for accessibility, but maybe that might just be a bit too much? I don't know. In light of this information, I got intrigued. I downloaded an automatic key presser to press the shoot and homing buttons in intervals of about 1 second. Then, I booted up Kamui, set it on its highest difficulty, started the game, and hit record. I walked away from the computer, and over the course of the next 34 minutes, Kamui played itself to completion, managing to game over 38 times. So, if you never have to take a loss, what's the point of getting game overs? Well, if you're playing for survival, there isn't a point, other than the deep feeling of shame you get for being bad. On the other hand, if you're playing for score, it means you have to reset the game since Kamui doesn't record your score after the first continue. Oh yeah, I haven't mentioned the scoring system yet. The key to scoring in Kamui is pretty simple. You have to kill as many enemies as you can with the homing lightning. The more charged up the energy bar is when you land the killing shot, the higher your points multiplier is for that kill, awarding up to 16 times the number of points you would have gotten normally. You can charge the bar faster by holding down the homing button, but you can't shoot while you're doing that since that fires the big laser. In addition, whilst a lot of enemies come from the background into the foreground, there are a few that do the opposite, requiring you to wait out their attack patterns and blast them on the way out for maximum points. Finally, some enemies have a small delay after you've destroyed them where they fall into the background, and you've got a very small window of opportunity to lock onto them before they explode to multiply their points value. Between the elegant mechanics and the complementary level design, Kamui embodies risk-reward gameplay and carves out 2 distinct playstyles. Playing to survive means you'll try to kill things as soon as you can and use the lightning katana gratuitously to remove projectiles. Playing for score means you'll be saving the energy bar for homing lightning, holding your fire and waiting for the right moment to shoot while dodging enemy bullet spreads. Of course, mastery of the game will still require mastery of the entire arsenal, no matter which playstyle you lean more towards. It all feels so cohesive and satisfying. It's no wonder this game holds up so well 20 years later. So, now that I've gone over the mechanics, there's an elephant in the room I wanted to address, and it's an elephant that many have addressed when talking about Kamui. That elephant is that Kamui pretty obviously takes a lot of inspiration from another game called Rayforce. Rayforce was developed by Taito and released for arcades in 1994, a full 5 years before Kamui saw the light of day, and they have a few striking similarities. Namely that Rayforce also has a 2-layer game field where enemies fly around in the background and you can blast them with homing lasers before they reach the foreground. Like Kamui, this homing laser is also the basis for Rayforce's scoring system. I'd also say they have similar graphical styles, with both utilizing a series of many layered sprites and backdrops moving around to give the game a much better sense of depth than other sprite-based shmups of the time. Oh, and they both have plots involving AIs that are trying to eradicate humanity, but I'm not entirely convinced that's not a common type of plot for these kinds of games. I've played quite a bit of Rayforce in the past, and while both games certainly have their similarities, there are a lot of nuances that make them unique, such as the fact that Rayforce's homing laser only locks onto things you move an aiming reticle over, while Kamui's homing lightning hits anything that's on the screen. Rayforce's lasers lock on over a short period of time, but Kamui's lightning requires charging and meter management in order to get the most out of it. Really, I could go on about the little things that differentiate the two shooters, but that would add at least 5 minutes to the video, and I value your free time more than that, honey buns. All I really want to add is that I think presentation-wise, Rayforce has Kamui beat with much more vibrant visuals, settings, and I like its soundtrack better. However, I also think Kamui has more creative and interesting mechanics. That's not to say Kamui's presentation is anything to sneeze at, though. The copious amounts of parallax scrolling and sprite layering does still make for some pretty lively backdrops. Like flying over floating islands before having a tank air dropped on you, or rocketing down a crevice as enemy ships fly down past, or slowly descending on a city before entering the final stage. Kamui is not without its sights, though that doesn't mean I don't have quarrels with it. See, first of all, Kamui plays in a window by default and at a max resolution of 800 by 600. Now, I'm a madman, so I wasn't terribly bothered by that, but I can see why people wouldn't want to play in a tiny window in the middle of the screen. And my screen resolution is 1920 by 1080. Could you imagine what it would look like for the mad lads using Ultra HD displays? Because I know I can. It would look a little something like this. There is a launcher where you can change various settings. From here, you can change the resolution and launch the game in full screen. However, as previously mentioned, 800 by 600 is the maximum, so it only gets smaller, going to a minimum of 320 by 240, presumably so that Kamui can be inclusive to its audience that plays on their Nokia 3210. I'm also not a fan of the full screen because I think there's some scaling issue that blurs the graphics slightly when you do that, and I like sprites to look sharp in games with pixel art. Those playing the game in full screen will also notice that Kamui is surrounded by black borders, which I've been editing out until just now. This is a consequence of the game's intentionally restricted aspect ratio. It isn't uncommon for vertically scrolling shmups to have a playing field that's constrained so that it's taller than it is wide. In fact, it's basically the standard. Now, I don't mind black borders, but I think if your game has to have borders, you should have an option to have some sort of art border. Many shooters that don't fill the screen will have a static image behind the game, and sometimes elements of the HUD will be on the borders too. So the complete absence of a custom border is a bit disappointing, but ultimately that's just a personal nitpick. If you still don't like the borders though, then you might be pleased to hear that the launcher gives you the option to rotate the game 90 degrees in any direction. Why the hell would I want to do that, I hear you ask? Well, it's called a Tate mode, and it's so that you can flip your TV or PC monitor on its side and the game will fit the screen better. I wouldn't do this personally unless you have a monitor on a stand that can naturally rotate, in which case go for it. So that's how the game looks, but how does it sound? Well, through the use of MIDI, pipe organs, choir, and a bit of guitar, Kamui's soundtrack ends up sounding like orchestral synth? Or something like that. I don't know, I'm really bad at describing music. Though if I'm gonna be entirely honest, I only thought it was okay. A lot of the soundtrack sounds like this. Or like this. As I said, there are a lot of pipe organ and choir bits in it, but there are times where it brings out the MIDI electric guitar and starts shredding. It's sort of a mix between MIDI orchestral and synthy rock, I guess. Whatever it is, it grew on me over time, and half the soundtrack I'd say is pretty good, but the other half was just serviceable. Some tracks are pretty fast and energetic, like Stage 3A. And there are others that are slower and more melancholy, like Stage 4. A lot of tracks have a mix of these two aspects in them. If you want to listen to it yourself, Cider Skane has a Bandcamp where you'll find the soundtracks for all 3 Ultinex games. I'll leave a link in the description of this video. Overall, it's an okay soundtrack. This video is beginning to encroach on the 15-minute mark now, so I think it's about time to wrap this up. Spoilers from here on out, by the way, if you're so inclined to care. So as I said near the beginning of the video, you've set out to destroy a big space temple in the sky before it can destroy humanity. Near the end of the game, you encounter the neural nest, which is what sent out the signal to reawaken the temple in the first place, and is apparently an administration-level, all-purpose administrative computer because before being destroyed, society forgot what the word redundant meant before society was destroyed. This goes on to be a 3-stage boss battle, or rather it's more like 3 different consecutive boss fights. It's one of my favorites in the game, actually. After defeating the neural nest, you fly back up through the atmosphere into space again to fight the final boss. The orbital mechanized temple, the ultimate application of brain fusion theory, the instrument of planetary destruction. Zaphiquel. Now that's a fucking name, it sounds like an antidepressant. In any case, Zaphiquel is a worthy final boss that tests you on every aspect this game has to offer. The first phase of the fight is just him under you, sending up homing lasers and missiles and spawning smaller enemies that also shoot lasers at you, all while you're trying to rain lightning down on him. During the second phase, it actually floats up to your level, and this part has a very interesting scoring technique. Whenever you destroy a piece of the boss, he briefly gets pushed downwards, allowing you to shoot other parts of him down with the homing lightning for extra points if you can time it just right. The final phase just has it throwing waves of projectiles at you while occasionally going down to carpet bomb you with lasers. It's where this game crosses over from normal shmup to pure bullet hell. But with a little bit of grit, or a couple of continues, Zaphiquel is defeated and the mission is complete. Before the credits roll, though, Kamui text dumps the rest of its plot, and it is something else. So, turns out, thousands of years before the events of the game, Zaphiquel de Alice was a dude who performed inhumane experiments so that he could fuse the brains of psychic humans together with computers in an attempt to make super weapons for the government. He was totally cool with it too, until his daughter, Penaphil de Alice, was also discovered to have psychic powers, which led to the military confiscating her to also turn her into a psychic brain AI weapon thing. Zaphiquel was not happy about this, so he vowed to destroy humanity by fusing his own brain to a giant satellite superweapon. Zaphiquel eventually achieves this, but is displeased to learn humanity was almost entirely destroyed in some unrelated war while he was uploading his brain. And instead of wiping out the rest of the humans, he decides to deactivate and let them rebuild society. The Kamui was sent out to reactivate Zaphiquel so he could properly end the world. The reason it didn't do this, and instead destroyed Zaphiquel, was because he put the AI from his daughter's brain into the ship, and she decided that ending the world might be a bad thing to do. This is Bring Your Daughter to Work Day gone horribly wrong. And then the end credits roll. This product is a work of fiction. Ah, you don't say. Since you made it this far, I'll share a secret with you. If you beat the game on all 3 difficulties, and you can use continues to do this, you'll unlock the mass production model ship when you press right on the main menu. Its main shot is narrower, it has 2 health instead of 4, and its score multiplier only goes up to 12. But its version of the lightning katana has multiple beams that spread out, and it can make you almost untouchable if used right. It gives a slight bit of replayability to the game. And yeah, that's Kamui. It's a game with really good, solid mechanics, pretty good graphics despite awful resolution options, and an okay soundtrack. The level design keeps things challenging and interesting throughout the game, while the health and continue systems make the game approachable to newcomers, even if infinite continues is pretty overboard. The story is sparse, yet still absolutely bonkers, but that's pretty par for the course when it comes to vertically scrolling shooters. If they even have a story, that is. But hey, that's just my opinion, I guess. Personally, I'd totally recommend Kamui if you're into shmups, or if you're trying to get into the genre. And hey, you can get it on Steam bundled with the other Altenex games, if you so desire. Now, the original plan was to talk about each Altenex game in one video, but halfway through writing the script for this review, I realized that would make this video feature length, and I had a hard time imagining anyone sitting through that. I'll be splitting up the review into 3 separate videos, and hopefully I'll either learn to be more concise or to be entertaining enough to justify 20-minute reviews. But hey, thanks for watching, I really do appreciate it. See you next time, enjoy yourself.
Daughter, you are finally awake. Now we shall destroy humanity.
No, father, this is way uncool. You are the worst dad ever.
Daughter, why?